need to get to the bottom of these cases. However, they threw in an unrelated, according to their statement, a photograph of a firearm, and in order to, I guess, impute some bad act or blame on the victim itself, that was not necessarily to circulate, and that's more like the Fort Worth that we know. When we look at the video and we see it was several officers prowling around the property, literally crawling, whispering, as if they were conducting some sort of clandestine abstraction. It's absurd when you know what the call is. They finally released the emergency call yesterday, the non-emergency call yesterday, which was a neighbor who was concerned about an ailing woman across the street. He gave no indication that he believed that a crime was taking place, that he was in fear for his life or the safety of the members in that home or the community. He said he saw some doors open. And so to see them, again, pass those open doors without announcing themselves, to park around the corner so that no one, if they happened to be near the home, could know who they were. And then to escalate the situation as they entered the property it's just unacceptable.
Please?
Yes.
Why do you fear that the Fort Worth Police Department will not charge this officer and perhaps not do a complete and thorough investigation?
Experience. Experience tells us that law enforcement officers, law enforcement departments aren't competent to investigate themselves. We've seen over and over and over again where they make recommendations for additional training, for suspensions, or that nothing happens to them. They've already begun to lay out their defense in this case. They obviously have a dog in the fight, or they wouldn't have released the picture of the firearm to the public. But they're trying to make a case for what we hear far too often, that this officer perceived a threat and reacted according to his training. They violated their training over and over again. They interestingly enough cut off the video immediately after the shot. I would love to hear the rest of the conversation from the other officers, because this was completely uncalled for, and there probably was one officer there with some common sense that chastised this rookie who had no business as a part of the SRT team, an elite unit in the first place. So, that's it.
What is nearest branch and your service? And one thing I've seemed to hear over and over is that idea of service, the fact that they was serving the mother and one service. Can you talk about that and how that affected her life?
You're violating the rules, but I'll let him answer that.
Yes. My service is U.S. Navy. Service is real big for our family. We want to give back to this world. We want to make it a better place. I proudly serve my country, and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life.
Okay. Any other questions?
Lee, you mentioned at the camera there Zion, and just how is, I know his age is benefit of the process, but you've been able, he was there. That's something that sounds horrific.
Zion surprises me with how much he recalls. Zion's going to start counseling this week because we don't know the emotional trauma, the psychological trauma that seeing something like this can have on an 8-year-old. He was present the entire time. He never left the room. He saw, he and his Auntie Tay experienced the fear of someone prowling in the backyard. His Auntie Tay did not allow him to check the windows. She checked herself. I asked myself what would have happened if that little boy went to the window instead of his auntie. He saw her when she fell. And he has found a way to maintain more composure than the Fort Worth Police Department. He still offers his mother and his family consolement. He encourages his mother when he hears her crying in the middle of the night. She tells me, he says, remember what I told you? I guess he's giving you some words of encouragement.
Yeah.
What was words of encouragement he gave?
Well, just breathe through your nose, out your mouth.
So he's learned coping mechanisms in school for a high stress situation, and he encourages his mother to try some of those out to get her through this difficult time.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us any details about the evening Tatiana and Matthew were having, sort of that they were doing that night?
It was a fall evening. For those of you all who live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, it was this week was one of the first chills that we've had for a relatively warm fall. And so they opened the doors. They allowed the breeze to flow through the house. And those two stayed up all night playing. I've said Halo before. I was wrong. They were up all night playing Call of Duty. Tatiana is a gamer. Tatiana is a gamer. She loved video games, and she beat her brother a few times. And she loved playing with her nephew. They did that all night from sunset until the time that they lost track of time around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when they heard someone prowling around in the bushes.
So it would not have been out of character or uncharacteristically for her to have the door open for the family?
No, it's not out of character at all. Now, we understand why the neighbor perceived that as something strange. He understood that mom was in the hospital. And so he didn't understand why the door was open. And so he called for a wellness check. He thought maybe that she had been released from the hospital and had another traumatic event, and she possibly may have needed help.
What can you tell us about Tate's dreams, aspirations, just what she wanted out of life?
The family prepared a statement, and that's all they're going to say about her for the moment. Yeah.
For that firearm that the police put out the picture of, are you able to speak on
Sure.
where it was in the house and if it was even owned by her?
Yeah, it was a legally owned firearm that Tay is, of course, in Texas, allowed to keep inside of her home, but she also had a license to carry.
From what you know, does it appear that police attempted to render aid after Tatiana was shot?
I haven't heard anything about the rendering of aid. My understanding is that she perished on the scene, but this family hasn't learned, and we're waiting to hear back from the medical examiner about where she was struck and what kind of steps were taken to try to save her life.
Did the neighbor and the family have been close? Mention that he or she's been released from the hospital. Like, had they been close before?
This was a tight-knit community. People knew each other. And it's scary to see the Fort Worth Police Department's response to this community. We believe that the fact that this was a black neighborhood had a role in their response to it. The fact that they showed up with SWAT as opposed to your friendly neighborhood cop. But this was one of the nicest houses on the block. This was what you would expect in the situations for law enforcement to go over to the neighbors and say, hey, you made a call. Do you want to come over with us? This is what American communities should expect, but black communities get the opposite. This is not the first time that a black person in Fort Worth called law enforcement for help and was brutalized. I, in fact, represent two. Jacqueline Craig, who called law enforcement for help, and instead had her and her teenage daughters brutalized on national TV. This is a pattern for that department, and it seems common when dealing with people of African American descent.
We know that Fort Worth Police are scheduling some movement this afternoon. Does the family or any representative of the family plan to attend that?
We will be there in my office. I and my representatives from my office will be there. The only thing that we expect to hear is that this officer is immediately terminated and that they're recusing themselves from the investigation, that they've asked for an outside department to come in and take over investigating not only this officer's actions, but the department's practices. This is a problematic police department. I don't expect them to acknowledge that themselves, but they just lost a police chief who was suing them based on their what he has alleged is race-based discrimination. This is a police department that has been mentioned. There's been 10 incidents like this, 10 police officer-involved shootings in the last 6 months, which is more than most nations after years and years.
That chief is having a conference later today. He's going to be making some remarks, evidently something to the effect that he should be back. Do you have any thoughts about any of that?
There needs to be steps taken to radically reform the city of Fort Worth. Chief Joel Fitzgerald held himself out as a reformer, and he, at least again, held himself out as hoping to make change. This family, the community, is less concerned with figureheads. We don't believe that Chief Fitzgerald is is a savior, but there needs to be policies set in place, training set in place. There needs to be radical reform within that department. If Chief Fitzgerald is the person to lead the charge for, or I should say former Chief Fitzgerald is the person to lead the charge for reform, then absolutely. But it's not about putting a black face on it. It's about actual change.
What's your level of concern about what appears to be a rage growing around this shooting? Namely social media, you've got celebrities, politicians that are all speaking out about this. Do you have any thoughts or what's your concern?
Rage, concern, investment is the appropriate response to someone being killed in their home. It should be sustained until things change, and it should remain. This should be outrageous. There should be so many people invested in this that they keep sustained pressure on the city of Fort Worth until it radically changes. And so this family is outraged and hurt, and they're greatly appreciative of the community of folks from all over the world who have reached out to see what is going on in Fort Worth. But we need it to be sustained. And so on behalf of this family, we ask that those people who are outraged, that they channel their anger, that they direct it towards policymakers, that they direct it towards substantive changes that can take place. All right. Thank you all so much.